Hi, my name is Elle Billing. I am a chronically ill queer femme, and I'm tired. I'm here this episode and every episode to dig at the roots of our collective fatigue, explore ways to direct our care in compassionate and sustainable ways, and harness creative expression to heal ourselves and our world. And welcome to Hoorf, radical care in a late capitalist hexscape. Welcome to part 2 of a special 2-part live recorded episode of Hoorf. Live recorded sounds a little weird, so I'll explain. This summer, we had the opportunity to visit Idaho and meet with today's guest in person. Instead of our usual web-based remote recording setup, we brought a field recorder and had our conversation across the table from each other at the UU Fellowship. We had a lovely conversation. We do want to mention that the audio quality is different from our usual episode. Time got away from us while we were talking, so instead of cutting out any of the conversation, we have decided to give you 2 episodes of our interview with Brandon. In part 1, we discussed the long-term activism that is participating in Idaho politics as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. In this episode, we bring you part 2, where we dig into the accessibility of queer spaces and the reality of being a disabled queer person. Thanks for being here, and we hope you enjoy part 2. My guest for this episode is Brandon Connolly. Brandon is Afro-Latino, an amputee, and a transgender man. Brandon embraces all of his intersectionalities, and it has helped him in his work as a community organizer and advocate in Idaho. Brandon has appeared on multiple podcasts, news interviews, articles, and even on a TV show on HBO. He is the president of a local LGBTQIA+ nonprofit organization and is the vice chairman for his county Democrats. Of all things, Brandon loves being the spouse of his wonderful partner and a dog dad. Welcome to the podcast, Brandon. We are so excited to have you here. What you were saying is so important about surrounding yourself with people who love you. I think during these hellish legislative sessions, and North Dakota, thank God, only has a legislative session in odd-numbered years. So, we get 2 years off now.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
But it also means they have 2 years to come up with new schemes.
That's true.
Yeah.
In Idaho, we just actually passed a law where they can stay in session for as long as they would like to.
What?
Oh,
There's no cutoff date now?
No.
Oh,
I mean,
the worst.
Yeah, if they decide that they want to extend the session, they can. And that used to be something that they had to go through the governor to do.
Yeah.
And now they don't have to.
Of course.
So, yeah, of course not. So, the idea that it could be never ending was, a huge thought on my mind this legislative session. I was like, oh my gosh, they could just do this all year long, forever, if they wanted to. And thankfully, they decided, yeah, it is super expensive, but everybody votes red here. It doesn't even matter what you care about versus what these legislators are telling you that they're going to do. If there's an R next to their name, people just instinctively, reactively, reflexively just circle that.
It's a lot like that.
R.
Yep. So, what you were saying about people speaking love into our lives, and especially if legislative sessions went never ending, but no matter how long they are, I think that is a really important time for our allies to show up. We don't really need you at Pride. Maybe this year we do. Please show up and stand between us and whomst ever. Mm-hmm. But Pride isn't for allies.
Right.
Right? Pride's for us.
Yeah.
If you really want to help us as an ally, show up at legislative time when we need you to support us.
Right. And it's so important to show these legislators that their constituents are not in support of these anti-LGBTQ bills.
There are straight cis, hetero, quote, normal, because that's a word that they would use, right? Idahoans who think that this is whack too.
Yeah. Like, that's the thing, is that the people that are actively trying to oppress us, they already know how we think and that we feel.
They already know.
Yeah.
We've made it pretty clear.
Yeah. So, like, you'll be talking to a legislator and their eyes just glaze over, and you could just tell that they've completely shut off, that they're not listening to anything that you're saying because they already know what you're going to say. Versus, for myself, what I've noticed is that because I am passing, I have this privilege to be able to go up to a legislator, and if I don't introduce myself in the way that I wish that I could, so I'm also like hiding and lying in some way, but I introduce myself as a constituent. I don't add the details that I wish that I could add of, like, I'm transgender and I'm this and I'm that. They listen to me more because I look like a straight, cisgender man. And so they want to know what I'm thinking. But when my friends who don't pass, who, they definitely express themselves much more in the way that feels comfortable for them, legislators just automatically don't want to talk to them at all. And I think that I've had that moment multiple times, not just with the legislative session, but also in smaller things like school districts. There was a school district not too long ago that had a gender-affirming policy, and a couple of parents realized that there was a gender-affirming policy and then threw a huge fit about it. And so this school district had several meetings with parents, but also teachers and their counselors, and I wanted to be a part of those conversations because I didn't feel like there was queer people that were represented in those conversations. And I would go with some of my friends who also wanted to say, like, hey, this is the reason why this policy exists. Let me tell you my experience. But when I would speak up, they would definitely listen to me more. They were more curious as to my answers. They would ask me more questions to try and understand where I was coming from, versus my friends, like I said, who did not pass, who were more expressionate in their appearance. And that was so incredibly frustrating to watch.
And I've heard that same thing from so many trans people who end up, we're both using quote fingers when we say passing, because passing isn't the goal of being trans. Right. That's not the point of being trans or of seeking gender affirming care. It's to be happy and feel comfortable and to be who you are, however that is on the gender galaxy nebula. It's, I guess, a little more complicated than the spectrum, but we can say that too.
Yeah, it definitely is.
It's that they notice a difference between when they were presenting as their birth assigned gender versus after they transitioned, and then, when they were perceived as female versus when they were passing as male, they were taken more seriously as a man, because of like misogyny, or they were taken less seriously when they passed as a woman, and then all of the different nuances in between, during the time when they were sort of ambiguously gendered. And then, of course, being somewhat androgynous is a whole other phenomenon when you're interacting with people. And it's just frustrating to see how people offer or withhold respect based on perceived gender, which just reinforces the whole idea that it's entirely a construct and it's all constructed through communication. But that doesn't make it any less important to honor and uphold and care for people wherever they are, in their journey and in their, it's like, yes, it's a construct. Yes, it's still important.
Yeah.
It seems so basic. I don't know why people don't get it.
I'm so sorry. I get really emotional about talking about that.
You don't have to apologize for having feelings.
But yeah, it's especially during legislative sessions, it's so difficult to watch these legislators dehumanize like these wonderful, wonderful people.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. I mean, and I saw it in the school where a student would start asserting at a young age something that was considered controversial in the school. You know, for years and years, adults would try to squash that. And then it's like, why can't you just let this kid be this kid?
Right. And it's so much, I feel like it's so much more effort and energy to try and tell them that they can't do something than to just let them flourish. And I've never understood that.
So I think it's an emotional topic because it's our lives. Mm-hmm. It's your life. It's our loved ones' lives. It's the kids that in our community, that we're around all the time. And we're like, we want it to be better for you. For a while we thought it was going to be. And now we're like, oh, it's the same fight. It's the same fight. It's the same fight.
Oh my gosh. But I think that it's something that I like to tell people is that it will get better, and it feels like it's not going to, because queer history has these ebb and flows, these mm-hmm. up and downs, where something historical happens that LGBTQ people either can express themselves more because the historical event allows them to, mm-hmm. and then another historical event happens where they have to go back into the closet, or they can't be so out there. And I'm solely talking about the United States. I don't have that queer history around the world. But in the United States, the late 30s and early 40s, there was more representation, queer representation at that time. And part of it was because of World War II. All the guys went overseas to go help fight Nazi Germany, right? And that means that women were more out and about. They were allowed to leave the home. They were allowed to wear pants. They were mm-hmm. allowed to work. They had financial independence. They had social independence. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of lesbians that felt this was a wonderful opportunity for them to be out. In fact, there's like a story about how Eisenhower knew that there was lesbians in the military, and he asked his secretary, he said, hey, if you know of any lesbians in the military, I need you to report them to me so that we can get them out. And she said, well, I will be the first on that list. And he very soon understood that his entire administration, which was full of women, were all lesbians.
Yeah, I've heard that story.
Said that, yeah, and then he's like, never mind. So, I mean, more queer people were allowed to be themselves during that time. And then, of course, in the 50s, after the war was over, and there was
swung very strongly in the opposite direction.
Yes, they were trying to get all the women back into the home, and they were trying to create that separation between man and woman, and like, what's your role and what's my role, and then in the 70s, we had our next spike, I guess. We were expressing ourselves more, and then we had that downturn again. Like, Stonewall happened during that time. I mean, we had our first gay representative in the United States ever mm-hmm. during that time as well. And then we had that downturn again when the AIDS epidemic happened in the 1983, 1984. And so that killed off most of our elderly and
or the people
our
who
elders,
would, yeah,
who
our
would
elders,
be elders,
the people who would be our elders now.
Yes, who would be our elders now. That's right. And then we had our spike up again in the 2010s, and then of course in 2016 when
backlash.
Yep, when Donald Trump came into his presidency, it became a huge problem again. But each time the timeline is getting a little bit shorter when we have our spikes. And I just try and remind myself, like, we are going to have our spike again, and we will be stronger again, mm-hmm. like we have been in the past. We keep getting stronger every single spike.
So I guess I have one more question. And if it's not something that you've really encountered here, or it's not something you want to speak to, that's fine. But I know you're not just a member of the LGBTQ community. You have some intersectional identities going on as well. And as a member of the disability community, can you speak to like ableism in the queer community? Is that something that you've encountered around here?
Yes. I'm dealing with that right now, actually.
Yeah. Like, I know you've had like generalized ableism. You've had problems at previous like places of employment, like when you in school, like it's tough out here for a crip. Your experience is different than mine. You were, I acquired my disability and you were born with yours. Is there anything you want to share about that? Or are you just like, that's too much. That's a whole other episode.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it could be. It could definitely be another episode, but I think, so I was born with amniotic band syndrome, which meant that my mom's amniotic sac fell apart when she was still pregnant with me. And what that did was, you know how like when you're a little kid and you think it's really funny to wrap rubber bands around your fingers and watch them
turn purple, yeah.
Yeah, and then they turn purple and then you like take them off really quickly so that you don't lose circulation in your fingers. That was basically what the amniotic bands did, is they wrapped around different parts of my body. They wrapped around like my whole left hand, and only one of my fingers didn't quite grow. Mm-hmm. And my right foot, so I don't have a big toe on my right foot. Okay. And then also my left leg, which probably has made the biggest impact. So when I was born, my left leg was basically just this sounds, don't think about it too much, but it just was basically a little skin sack. There was really not a whole lot of development in my leg at that time. So my amputation was when I was 8 months old, which is a huge blessing for me because I don't have to deal with a lot of the things that most amputees, when they have that happen to them when they're older. Like, I don't have phantom pains. I have been able to adapt to my environment much quicker than some people that have had that experience when they're older. So there's that little bit of background. So growing up, I've always been that kid that, gosh, little kids are mean, by the way. They would call me names. They didn't want to play with me. But at the same time, I was always like the educator. My parents and my teachers would get together before the beginning of the year, and they would kind of discuss on how best to bring it up to other kids because they didn't want me to feel so isolated by myself. And so there was a lot of me talking to every elementary school class and talking about, like, this is what my prosthesis looks like and this is what my leg looks like. See, it's not so scary. And so there was a lot of that. So I feel like being an amputee has kind of like been the precursor to me being an educator now, being trans. And
it's like, see, I'm not scary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel like I'm repeating the same
approachable.
thing.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm repeating the same thing over and over and over again in different intersectionalities. It's funny how life works that way, but something in the queer community.
But like not ha-ha funny.
Yeah, not ha-ha funny.
But like funny. And then we laugh so we don't cry.
Groans and sighs. But in the queer community, what I come across is, people don't think about it when they're talking to me, especially when I'm wearing pants. And I also hear this a lot, like, oh, you get around so well. So then they don't really think of
accessibility.
Yeah, they don't think of accessibility when they're talking to me because I move around so well. And it's funny because, not ha-ha funny, because they don't see me when I'm struggling. So they're seeing me in that moment when I've taken the time and the preparation to be out that day or that week or whatever I needed to do to be out and about and walking. So I think that accessibility around queer topics is neglected a lot, especially with Pride coming up. A lot of Pride festivals do not make their Pride festival accessible. They put everything on the grass, like most of the time, like they're in parks.
Or in parks, there's no sidewalks.
Yep, exactly. So there's no sidewalks. I've had this problem with people that I've had in the past organized with, and they've been like, oh yeah, we'll put all the canopies in the grass over here, or like it's funny. This year we're going to have we're calling it the sensory tent. And it's going to, yep.
Yay! Oh, that just makes my heart smile.
But we're trying to make it like a dark space so people can get away from all the lights. It's away from the stage so people don't have to listen to all the noise. We're going to be putting earplugs in there so that people can use those earplugs if they don't have any seats. But the thing is that it's in the grass. So anybody that's not able to get in the grass or walk around in the grass, like they're not going to be able to access this sensory tent.
The accessibility tent.
Yeah, the accessibility tent. The irony in it. And and the thing is that the way that we have our park set up, we usually only use one half of the park for a festival. And we've really tried to push like, okay, well, let's make it like every single cement sidewalk that we can find. Let's just spread it out. Let's use the whole park. We're renting the whole park anyway. And that was a huge issue with some organizers that I've talked to. And so there's a lot of vendors that are going to be in the grass. The sensory tent is going to be in the grass. They were like, well, if we put the sensory tent on the sidewalk, it's going to be all the way out and away from everybody else. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the point. Like, at least they could access that spot. At least they could get into the tent. At least they could use it, even if it's away from everybody else. That's kind of the point.
Yeah. It's like, I can't even imagine trying to like get through the grass of City Park, like with a power wheelchair.
Oh, I had one lady.
Or any wheelchair, especially like self-propelled either.
Yeah.
Like,
there's one person that has gone to the Pride Festival here in town, and she gets around really well as long as she's obviously on the sidewalk, but she kind of pushes herself with her legs. She doesn't really use her arms. She uses her arms to kind of like make those little stops on the wheels just so that she could turn, but she uses her leg to push herself, so she's always like moving backwards.
I've seen her in town. Yep.
Yes. Anyway, last year she came by. I was a vendor that year, so last year she came by our tent and she started talking about how inaccessible the whole thing was. She was like, it took me forever just to get to you guys, and we were like on one of the far corners of our map at that point. And she's like, it took me forever to get over here. I've been here all day. And she was like, I'm not looking forward to going back because I'm not going to be able to get back up on the sidewalk because there's kind of a lip on the sidewalk in City Park. And I asked her if she needed help. Like, I was like, I could go, I would love to escort you and take you back over there and I could help. But I think that, you know, there's a lot of pride involved sometimes. And she was like, no, I don't need any help. I'm going to figure it out by myself. And I'm sure she did.
Yeah.
With a little bit of struggle. But that's the thing, is that like every LGBTQ person should be able to celebrate all parts of themselves. Like that's the thing about being LGBTQ, is that being queer people, we are more than just queer. Yeah. And that, I think, is it like that goes over some people's heads of like, no, this is like my whole identity. But it's like, no, there's queer people that are, you know, like me, that are amputees, but I'm also like a person of color. I'm Black. I'm Mexican. You know, my indigenous roots are, you know, with the Aztecs. And so there's like things about me that are more than just being transgender and queer. And that's with every single queer person. Like, there's more about you than being queer. And so when you don't think about being inclusive or diverse in the LGBTQ community, you are cutting off so many parts of the LGBTQ community. So it's a huge struggle that we've always had and we continue to have, but we're slowly working on it. Not getting there. We're working on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I just like think about all my queer friends, it's like, yeah, none of us are like just queer. Yeah. We all have all this other gloriousness about us.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, when 25%, give or take, of the general population is disabled. So I would assume that about 25% or so of the queer community is probably disabled too. Maybe even more.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah. Or have you ever heard of like the Venn diagram between queer people and autism?
It's like a circle.
It's like a circle. Yeah.
Or at least neurodivergence.
Yeah.
Because like I'm not autistic, but I have ADHD.
Yeah.
And my sister's autistic. And like, it's like, like what's up in our family?
But it's true. So, I mean, but to not think about it like that, to not, like we joke about it and then we do nothing about it. We don't make
the whole thing
those
about
accessible to ourselves.
You've heard of a bisexual chair, right? Or how bisexuals can't chair. Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. It's like, well, neither can people with ADHD. So again, it's the overlap of the people with ADHD and people who are bisexual is like the Venn diagram's a circle, and none of us can sit in a chair. Yeah. Like, accessibility, weird chairs. Yeah. And sidewalks.
Weird chairs and sidewalks. That's all we're asking right now.
And ramps. No fluorescent lights. Like I'm trying to like think of things that I need too.
Oh my gosh.
Fluorescent lights are really difficult, but like I just wear shades everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like most of my accessibility needs are things that I have to handle on my own. Yeah. You know, but it's like food and lighting.
Yeah. I'm also incredibly aware of like if there's an elevator in a building that has stairs, because I have had those experiences where I can't get on the second floor, third floor, whatever floor, to access like resources, for example. Yeah. There's a lot of LGBTQ focused organizations that use these older buildings because that's either for aesthetics or that's what they can afford. Yeah. And they don't have elevators in them. And it's like, okay, so there's like a huge population of queer people that, I don't know, can't go see a therapist because you put your therapist on the second floor with stairs.
Yeah. I had a guest early in the first season who is limb different. So she was born with one arm. And her kid's pediatrician is in a building with no elevator. Oh, and so like she uses elevators because you have to have two hands to lift a stroller up the stairs. Yeah. And so she's like, and you know, you talked about the pants thing. For her, it's when she's wearing a jacket, people don't realize she only has one hand. And then she takes her coat off and they're all like, oh, I didn't know you only had one hand. Now I don't know how to be around you. But then like New York City, again, all old buildings. Yeah. Everybody's in a walk-up with no elevator, and she's trying to wrestle kids upstairs to see the pediatrician or to go wherever, and it's just ridiculously inaccessible. Yeah. And it's like, just stop staring at me and like help me or something. Like, yeah, I don't want you to pity me. Mm-hmm. I just need a little something. And it's not what you're giving me right now.
Seriously. Gosh, that happens to me a lot, especially when I have a handicap placard, and so when I'm parking in a handicap spot and I'm wearing pants, people glare at me. Yeah,
they're like,
yeah,
show a little shiny ankle.
It's like everybody's policing me, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you don't have to see something wrong with me for me to have this for me. Yeah. Gosh, mind your own business. And so, but when I'm wearing shorts, that's like I step out of my car and immediately people are like, oh, and then they like look away and then they go back to their own thing. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. But yeah, it's just everything is so incredibly inaccessible. And I know that there's more architecture that is becoming more accessible, but that's such a slow process. And we don't do enough in our infrastructure already to try and make things accessible. We're just like waiting for new buildings to pop up so that they can be accessible. And it's like, what
about the ones that we already have?
Yes, exactly. Why don't we take that responsibility for ourselves and create everything more accessible instead of waiting for somebody else to build it for us? Yeah. So,
well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hoorf. To view the complete show notes and all the links mentioned in today's episode, or to get a full transcript of the episode, visit hoorfpodcast.com. That's HOORF podcast.com. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they're released.
And if you're enjoying our podcast, I'd love to have you leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. Reviews are one of the major ways that Apple ranks their podcasts, so even though it only takes you a few seconds, it really does make a difference for us. Become a patron. For $3 a month, you can support the creation of this podcast, pay my editor, and join a community of fellow caregivers out here just doing our best. Thank you again for joining me, Elle Billing, in this episode of Hoorf. Until next time, be excellent to each other. Hoorf is hosted by Elle Billing at Elle and Wink. Audio editing by Ricky Cummings at Ricky Poo. Music composed by Ricky Cummings. Hoorf is a production of Elle and Wink Art Studio, all rights reserved. Hoorf Podcast can be found on social media channels at Hoorf Podcast, at HOORF Podcast.
Accessibility, weird chairs, and sidewalks.
Weird chairs and sidewalks. That's all we're asking.